Elizabeth's heart pounded against the restrictive bindings, crushing her chest as Lucas Blackwood's piercing blue eyes studied her face for a second too long. 5 months of careful deception hung in the balance as moonlight spilled across the prairie, threatening to illuminate the truth she'd sacrificed everything to hide. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go! Under the vast Wyoming sky, Jessie Miller rode with practiced ease, her slim frame hidden beneath layers of worn denim and flannel. 5 months of living as a boy had taught her how to move, shoulders squared, jaw set firm, voice pitched low on the rare occasions she spoke. She'd bound her chest so tight some mornings it hurt to breathe, but that pain was nothing compared to what waited if anyone discovered her truth. The sprawling Blackwood Ranch emerged on the horizon as dusk painted the prairie in amber hues. Jessie adjusted her hat lower, obscuring her face as she approached. The muscles in her shoulders tensed, a constant companion since she'd fled Missouri with nothing but her father's clothes and the haunting memory of what she'd left behind. You, the new hand. A burly man with a graying beard stepped from the barn, squinting at her through the fading light. Jessie nodded once, keeping her eyes downcast. Yes, sir, Jessie Miller. Well, don't just sit there. Get your horse settled and find Emmett. He'll show you where to bunk. The man turned away, muttering something about scrawny boys and not lasting a week. She dismounted carefully, movements deliberate as she led her horse to the stable. Inside, the familiar sense of hay and leather calmed her racing heart. 5 months, 3 ranches, and no one had questioned her disguise. Here, she'd be just another farmhand, invisible, forgettable, safe. You handle that mare like you've known her forever, the voice came from behind, startling her. Jessie turned to find a tall man leaning against the doorframe, his features partially shadowed by the brim of his hat. Something about his posture, relaxed, yet alert, made her instantly wary. "I'd had her since she was a foal," Jessie mumbled, turning back to unsaddle the horse. "Name's Lucas Blackwood." He stepped closer, extending a hand. "This is my father's ranch." Jessie wiped her palm on her trousers before shaking his hand briefly, careful to keep the contact firm but quick. Jessie Miller. His eyes, a striking pale blue that seemed to catch every hint of light, studied her face a moment too long. "Welcome to Blackwood Ranch, Jessie. You'll start tomorrow at dawn. Emmett will show you the ropes." As he walked away, Jessie released the breath she'd been holding. There was something unsettling about Lucas Blackwood, something in his gaze that felt like it could peel away layers. She would need to be more careful around him. The bunkhouse was mercifully dim when she entered, with most of the men already asleep or playing cards at the far end. An older cowhand nodded toward an empty cot in the corner. "That's yours? Keep to yourself and do your work. We'll get along fine." Jessie nodded gratefully, setting her meager belongings beneath the cot before stretching out, still fully clothed. Sleep would be fitful, as it always was in new places, but she'd learned to function on little rest. Tomorrow would be another day of vigilance, of guarding her secret with her life, because that's exactly what it would cost her if anyone discovered that Jessie Miller wasn't a boy at all, but Elizabeth Jessica Harmon, wanted for murder back in Missouri, a crime she didn't commit, but one that had forced her to become someone else entirely. Dawn broke harsh and early across the Wyoming territory. Jessie was already awake when the bunkhouse stirred to life, having mastered the art of rising before the others to avoid the vulnerability of changing clothes in company. She splashed cold water on her face from the basin outside, the shock helping to clear the fog of another restless night. "Miller," a weathered man with a limp approached. "I'm Emmett. You're with me today?" He didn't wait for acknowledgement, just turned and headed toward the eastern pasture. Jessie followed silently, grateful for the straightforward task ahead. Working cattle was something she understood, having grown up on her father's small farm before everything fell apart. The physical demands of ranch work suited her purpose. Exhaustion made it easier to keep her guard up, to remember she was Jessie now, not Elizabeth. The morning passed in a blur of dust and cattle, the rhythm of the work allowing her mind to quiet. Emmett proved to be a man of few words, offering instruction only when necessary and seeming satisfied with her competence. By midday, sweat had soaked through her shirt, making the bindings around her chest uncomfortably tight. She adjusted her posture slightly, trying to ease the pressure without drawing attention. "But you ride well for someone so young," Emmett commented during a brief water break. "Where'd you learn?" "My pa," Jesse answered, the familiar lie coming easily now. "Had a small place in Missouri. Taught me everything before he passed." Emmett nodded, accepting the sparse story without question. Few men on the frontier asked for more. Everyone had something in their past they'd rather not discuss. "A Blackwood's coming," Emmett said suddenly, nodding toward an approaching rider. Jesse tensed instinctively as Lucas Blackwood rode toward them, his form silhouetted against the midday sun. There was something in his bearing, a natural authority that went beyond his position as the ranch owner's son. Men like him made her nervous. They noticed things others missed. "How's the new hand working out?" Lucas asked Emmett, though his eyes settled on Jesse. "Works hard enough, knows his way around cattle," Emmett replied. Lucas dismounted, moving with the fluid ease of someone who'd spent his life on horseback. Up close, Jesse could see the fine lines around his eyes, not from age, as he couldn't be more than 30, but from squinting against the harsh prairie sun. "You ever break horses, Miller?" Lucas asked. "Some," Jesse answered, careful to keep her voice low and even. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Good. We've got a few that need attention. You'll work with me tomorrow." Before she could respond, he was back on his horse, riding toward the next group of hands. Jesse watched him go, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. "Lucky you," Emmett said with a dry chuckle. Blackwood doesn't usually take to training new hands himself. Lucky wasn't the word Jesse would have chosen. The more distance between her and the observant Lucas Blackwood, the better her chances of keeping her secret. Tomorrow would require even greater vigilance. As the sun began its descent, turning the prairie gold, the men returned to the ranch proper. Jessie's muscles ached pleasantly from the day's labor, but her mind remained alert, cataloging the routines and rhythms of the run. Knowledge was survival. The evening meal was served in the cookhouse, a simple affair of beans, cornbreads and coffee, strong enough to stand a spoon in. Jessie took her plate to the edge of the group, eating quickly and keeping her head down as conversation flowed around her. "Miller," the deep voice beside her made her start slightly. Lucas Blackwood had approached without her noticing, a dangerous lapse in attention. A word, heart pounding. Jesse followed him outside, where the evening air had begun to cool. Had he somehow seen through her disguise already? Had she made some telling mistake? "I noticed you favoring your right side toward the end of the day," Lucas said, surprising her. "Old injury?" Relief washed over her. "Yes, sir. Took a fall last year. Acts up sometimes." He studied her face in the fading light. "Ranch works hard enough without pushing through pain. See Doc Willis if it gets worse. No good to me injured." The unexpected concern caught her off guard. "I'll be fine, sir." "Lucas," he corrected. "Save you, sir, for my father." He paused, then added, "Where'd you say you were from, Miller?" "Missouri," she answered. Too quickly, perhaps. Long way to travel for ranch work. Jessie forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "And nothing left for me there." Something in his expression shifted, a flicker of understanding, perhaps. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will test what you're made of." As he walked away, Jessie remained rooted in place, trying to calm her racing heart. Lucas Blackwood saw too much, asked too many questions. She would need to be perfect tomorrow, not just competent, but forgettable. Another faceless ranch hand not worth a second glance. The moon rose full and bright over the prairie as Jessie finally made her way to the bunkhouse. Inside, most of the men were already asleep, their snores creating a rumbling chorus. She lay down fully clothed as always, pulling the rough blanket up to her chin. Sleep would be long in coming tonight, her mind too busy constructing defenses against Lucas Blackwood's perceptive gaze. 5 months of careful deception had kept her alive, had kept her free. She couldn't afford to falter now, not when the alternative was a hangman's noose for a crime that had been self-defense, no matter what the Missouri authorities believed. Tomorrow would be another test, another day of being Jessie Miller. Elizabeth Jessica Harmon was dead, she reminded herself fiercely. She had to be. Dawn arrived with alarming swiftness. Jessie rose before the first hints of light breached the horizon, slipping outside to wash and change the bindings that flattened her chest. The cold water bit at her skin, but she welcomed the shock. Anything to sharpen her mind for the day ahead. Working directly with Lucas Blackwood meant hours of scrutiny she couldn't afford. One misstep, one moment of forgetfulness, and everything would unravel. The thought made her hands tremble slightly as she rewrapped the strips of cloth, pulling them tight enough to make breathing shallow but bearable. By the time she returned to the bunkhouse, the other hands were stirring. She kept her eyes lowered, focusing on rolling up her bedding and gathering what she needed for the day. None of the men paid her much attention. New hands came and went frequently enough that they'd learned not to invest in friendships too quickly. The horse corrals stood separate from the main barn, a series of sturdy pens where half-broken mounts waited for further training. Jessie spotted Lucas already there, his tall frame leaning against the fence as he studied a spirited chestnut stallion circling the enclosure. "Right on time, Miller," he said without turning, somehow aware of her approach despite her deliberately quiet footsteps. "Let's see what you know about breaking horses." Jessie dropped her gear by the fence, forcing herself to move with the confident swagger she'd practiced. "Where do you want me to start?" Now Lucas did turn, his pale blue eyes assessing her with that same unsettling thoroughness. "Tell me your approach first. I want to know if you were taught right." It was a test, and they both knew it. Jessie swallowed hard, gathering her thoughts. Her father had been renowned for his way with horses, a gift he'd passed to his daughter despite believing it unsuitable for a woman. The irony wasn't lost on her. "First, you need to understand the horse," she began, her voice deliberately pitched lower. "Each one's different. Some respond to gentleness, others need firmness, but they all need to know you're not a threat before they'll accept you as a leader." Something flickered in Lucas's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. "Go on." "Breaking isn't about breaking their spirit," Jessie continued, the words coming more naturally now. "It's about teaching them to accept direction. A horse that still has fire in its eyes but willingly takes a saddle is worth 10 that have had their will crushed." Lucas's mouth curved slightly. "Your pa teach you that?" Jessie nodded, the memory of her father both comforting and painful. He had a way with horses, said they could see inside a person, know their true nature. "Smart man," Lucas replied, turning back to the chestnut stallion. "Let's see if his teaching took. That one there," he nodded toward the restless animal, "has thrown every hand who's tried to ride him. Emmett calls him Devil's Spite." Jessie studied the horse with new interest. The stallion was magnificent, with powerful shoulders and intelligent eyes that tracked their movements warily. But she could see the fear beneath the aggression. The way he flinched slightly whenever someone moved too quickly near the fence. "He's been mistreated," she said quietly. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" "The way he watches hands, not faces. Someone's hit him before, probably whenever he's refused a command." A long silence followed her observation. When she finally glanced at Lucas, the intensity in his gaze made her look away quickly. "Most men just see a difficult horse," he said finally, "although they don't look deeper." Something in his tone made Jessie wonder if they were still talking about the stallion. She shrugged, uncomfortable with his scrutiny. "My pa always said to look for the reason behind bad behavior. Horses don't act up without cause." Lucas nodded slowly. "All right, Miller, show me what you can do with him." Jessie's heart hammered against her bindings as she collected a rope and slipped between the fence rail. The stallion snorted, backing away with ears pinned flat. She stood very still, keeping her eyes lowered slightly to avoid challenging him directly. "Hey there," she murmured, her voice gentler than any of the men had heard her use. "Nobody's going to hurt you today." For nearly an hour, she worked with quiet patience, never rushing, never forcing. The stallion gradually stopped retreating, his curiosity overtaking fear. By mid-morning, he was allowing her to approach within touching distance, though she deliberately refrained, knowing trust needed to be earned in small increments. From the corner of her eye, she could see Lucas watching intently, his expression unreadable. Other ranch hands had gathered at the fence as well, drawn by the unusual spectacle of the feared stallion standing calmly while the new hand spoke to him in low, soothing tones. When she finally stepped back and slipped out of the corral, She was drenched in sweat despite the cool morning air. The physical strain of maintaining her disguise while working with the unpredictable animal had taxed her more than she cared to admit. "Never seen anything like that," one of the older hands muttered. "That devil hasn't let anyone near him since he arrived." Lucas said nothing, just handed Jessie a canteen of water. She drank deeply, careful to maintain the mannerisms she'd studied in the men around her, the way they wiped their mouths with the backs of their hands, the slight jutting of the jaw when they finished. "Take a break," Lucas finally said. "Then we'll see about getting a saddle on him." The other hands drifted away, returning to their assigned tasks. Jessie made to follow, needing distance from Lucas's too observant gaze, but his voice stopped her. "Where'd you really learn horses, Miller?" She froze, then turned slowly. "Told you, my pa. Most men who break horses do it with force," Lucas said, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. "What you just did, that patience, that understanding, that's rare," Jessie shrugged, struggling to maintain her facade. "Only way I know. And your pa taught you that?" "Yes." Lucas studied her for a long moment. "He must have been an unusual man." "He was," Jessie replied, unable to keep a hint of pride from her voice. The ghost of a smile touched Lucas's lips. "Get some food. We've got more work to do." As Jessie walked toward the cookhouse, she could feel his eyes on her back. The conversation had veered too close to dangerous territory. Lucas Blackwood noticed too much, questioned too freely. She would need to be more guarded, give away less of herself. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of cautious progress with the stallion. By late afternoon, Jessie had managed to rest a light saddle blanket on his back for a few seconds before he shook it off. Lucas had mostly observed, occasionally offering a suggestion, but largely allowing her to work at her own pace. When the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the prairie in burnished gold, Lucas finally called a halt. "That's enough for today. He's made more progress in hours than he has in weeks." Jessie nodded, exhaustion evident in the slight slump of her shoulders. The strain of maintaining her disguise while focusing on the unpredictable stallion had drained her completely. "You did well," Lucas added, his voice softer than she'd heard him use with the other hand. "Thank you, sir." "Lucas," she corrected herself quickly. He studied her face for a moment longer than was comfortable. "You're not what I expected, Miller." Before she could respond, he turned away, calling instructions to another hand about the evening feeding. Jessie stood frozen, uncertainty churning in her stomach. Had she revealed too much of herself today? Had her natural affinity with horses somehow betrayed her? As she made her way back to the bunkhouse, she resolved to be more careful tomorrow. She would speak less, reveal less of her thoughts. Whatever Lucas Blackwood saw in her, whatever made his gaze linger too long, needed to be buried deeper. The evening meal passed in relative silence. Jessie, too, exhausted for even the minimal conversation she usually managed. Several of the hands commented on her work with the stallion, but she deflected their questions with shrugs and non-committal grunts. Later, lying on her cot in the darkness, Jessie stared at the ceiling, sleep elusive despite her bone-deep weariness. Tomorrow would bring another day under Lucas Blackwood's watchful eye, another day of pretending to be someone she wasn't, another day of carrying the weight of her past while trying to forge some kind of future, a future that grew more uncertain with each lingering look from the rancher's perceptive blue eyes. For 3 weeks, Jessie worked with the stallion they called Devil's Spite, though she'd taken to calling him Ember in her mind, for the spark of intelligence in his eyes and the way his coat gleamed like fire in the setting sun. Each day brought small victories. The first time he allowed the saddle to rest on his back without bucking, the moment he accepted the bit without fighting, the tentative steps he took with her weight on his back. And each day, Lucas Blackwood watched. Sometimes he offered guidance, but mostly he observed with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. Jessie felt his gaze like a physical touch, searching for cracks in her carefully constructed identity. "You've got a gift," he told her one evening, as they brushed down the horses after a long session. "I've never seen anyone connect with animals the way you do." Jessie kept her head down, focusing on the repetitive strokes of the brush. "Just patience, that's all. It's more than that." Lucas leaned against the stall door, arms crossed over his chest. "It's understanding, empathy even. Most men don't bother trying to see the world through a horse's eyes." The observation came too close to revealing something essential about her, something feminine that she couldn't afford to have noticed. "My pa always said understanding saves time in the long run. No point fighting an animal when you can work with its nature." Lucas nodded slowly. "Your father sounds like a wise man. You must miss him." The unexpected gentleness in his voice caught her off guard. For a dangerous moment, genuine emotion threatened to break through her facade. She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly to dispel the sudden moisture in her eyes. "Every day," she admitted quietly, the words escaping before she could stop them. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the soft sounds of the horse shifting in its stall and the distant calls of men finishing their day's work. When Jessie finally dared to glance up, the expression on Lucas's face made her breath catch. Sympathy without pity, understanding without intrusion. "I lost my mother when I was 12, he said, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Ama, some days I still turn to tell her something before remembering she's gone." Jessie nodded, not trusting herself to speak. This unexpected moment of connection felt both comforting and dangerous. Comforting to share even this small truth. Dangerous because every genuine emotion risked revealing her true self. "Anyway," Lucas straightened, breaking the moment, "you've earned yourself a change of duties. Starting tomorrow, you'll be working with all our problem horses. Emmett can handle the regular stock, but your touch is wasted on horses that are already well-behaved." Pride warmed her chest despite her caution. "Thank you." He studied her for a moment longer. "You know, most boys your age would be crowing about their success with devil's spite. You're different. Miller, quieter, more thoughtful." Jessie's heart skipped a beat. Different was dangerous. Different drew attention, just not much for talking, she mumbled, turning back to the horse. "Nothing wrong with that," Lucas replied, "just an observation." After he left, Jessie leaned her forehead against Ember's warm neck. Drawing a deep breath to steady herself, Lucas had promoted her, singled her out for special work, exactly what she shouldn't want if her goal was to remain unremarkable and forgettable. Yet she couldn't deny the satisfaction she felt at having her skill recognized, at being valued for something genuine about herself when so much else was false. It was a dangerous indulgence, she knew, but after months of hiding, of being nobody, the acknowledgement felt like water to parched earth. That night in the bunkhouse, several of the hands congratulated her on the promotion, their initial wariness having given way to a grudging respect over the weeks. Jessie accepted their words with brief nods, maintaining her reputation for reticence, but inwardly, she felt a complicated mixture of pride and anxiety. "Blackwood must see something special in you," one of the older hands commented. "He doesn't usually take such an interest in new recruits." The observation sent a chill through her. Interest was the last thing she wanted from anyone, especially someone as observant as Lucas Blackwood. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams a jumbled mess of memories and fears. Her father's face, kind but worried as he taught her to ride, the horrified expression of the man she'd killed, his hands still reaching for her as he fell, the feeling of Lucas's eyes on her, seeing too much, understanding too well. She woke before dawn as always, her heart pounding from a dream she couldn't fully recall. Slipping outside to change her bindings in the pre-dawn darkness, Jessie tried to calm her racing thoughts. She needed to be more careful, to pull back from the dangerous connection forming between herself and Lucas Blackwood. The new assignment should have been a blessing. Working primarily with horses meant less time around the other hands, less constant vigilance. But it also meant more time alone with Lucas. More opportunity for him to study her, to notice the small inconsistencies in her disguise. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Jessie made a resolution. She would do her job well, but guard herself more carefully. No more personal revelation, no matter how small. No more moments of connection. She would be competent but forgettable, skilled but unremarkable in every other way. It was a resolution that lasted precisely until mid-morning, when Lucas led her to a new corral containing a sleek black mare with a white blaze on her forehead. "This one's different," he warned as they approached the fence. "Not mean-spirited like devil's spite, but skittish. Won't let anyone near her since she arrived 2 weeks ago. Previous owner said she was fine until a mountain lion spooked her during a ride, threw her rider, who broke his leg, then ran 15 miles before they caught her. been terrified of people since. Jessie studied the mare, noting the way she paced the perimeter of the corral, her movements graceful but tense. "She's not mean," Jessie agreed softly. "She's afraid." Lucas glanced at her. Can you help her?" Something in his voice, a genuine concern for the animal rather than just its value, made Jessie's carefully constructed walls weaken slightly. "I can try." For hours, Jessie worked with the mare, using techniques her father had taught her, sitting quietly in the center of the corral, never approaching directly, letting the horse grow accustomed to her presence. By late afternoon, the mare had stopped circling and stood watching Jessie with cautious interest. Lucas brought lunch and sat on the fence, observing without comment. When Jessie finally emerged from the corral, without having touched the mare once, he raised an eyebrow. "Doesn't look like much progress," he remarked, though his tone held no criticism. "It is," Jessie replied, accepting the canteen he offered. "She's thinking now, not just reacting. Tomorrow will be better." Lucas studied her face, that same searching look that always made Jessie's pulse quicken with anxiety. "You know, most men would have tried to rope her by now, force her to accept handling, and they'd have a horse that hated them," Jessie countered, then immediately regretted her sharp tone. But Lucas only smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "Exactly. Like I said, you're different. Miller," there it was again, that dangerous word, different. Jessie looked away, uncomfortable with both the observation and the warmth it stirred in her. "My father wants to meet you," Lucas said suddenly. "He's been hearing about your way with horses and asked me to bring you to the main house for dinner tonight." Jessie's stomach dropped. "I don't think it wasn't a request," Lucas interrupted gently. My father owns this ranch, and when he asks to meet one of the hands, they come." Panic fluttered in Jessie's chest. The bunkhouse was one thing. Dim lighting, men too tired to pay much attention, communal spaces where she could maintain her distance. But dinner at the main house, bright lamps, close scrutiny, conversation she couldn't avoid. "I'm not much for talking," she attempted, knowing even as she spoke that it was futile. Lucas's expression softened slightly. "He just wants to thank you for your work with the horses. You won't have to entertain him with conversation." Jessie nodded stiffly, seeing no way to refuse without drawing even more unwanted attention. "What time? I'll come get you after you've cleaned up." Lucas hesitated, then added, "Don't worry so much, Miller. It's a good thing to be noticed for your skills." But being noticed for anything was precisely what Jessie feared most. As she watched Lucas walk away, dread settled in her stomach like a stone. Dinner with the ranch owner meant bright lights, close quarters, and inevitable questions, all circumstances that increased the risk of her discovery, and discovery meant death. The main house of Blackwood Ranch stood as a testament to years of hard work and prosperity, a two-story structure of solid timber with wide windows and a wraparound porch. It dwarfed the modest cabins Jessie had grown up in, making her feel even more out of place as she climbed the steps beside Lucas that evening. She'd done what she could to prepare, washing thoroughly at the pump behind the bunkhouse and putting on her cleanest shirt. Her hands still bore the calluses and small cuts of daily ranch work, but she'd scrubbed them until they were as presentable as possible. The bindings around her chest felt particularly restrictive tonight, a constant reminder of what she risked. "Stop looking like you're heading to your execution," Lucas murmured as they reached the door. "My father doesn't bite." Jessie managed a tight nod, her throat too dry for words. Lucas opened the door, and warm light spilled out onto the porch, along with the rich aroma of roasting meat and fresh bread. "There you are," called a deep voice from within. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten." The owner of the voice appeared in the entryway, an older version of Lucas with the same tall frame and broad shoulders, though his hair had gone silver at the temples and deep lines framed his eyes. There was a strength in his bearing that age hadn't diminished, and his gaze was just as perceptive as his son's. "Father, this is Jessie Miller, the hand I told you about," Lucas said, ushering Jessie forward. "Samuel Blackwood." The older man extended his hand. "I've heard impressive things about your way with horses, young man." Jessie shook his hand firmly, the way she'd observed other men do. "Thank you, sir. Come in." Dinner's ready. Maria's made her roast, and it's not to be missed. The interior of the house was as impressive as its exterior. Polished wood floors, a massive stone fireplace, furniture that spoke of quality rather than mere function. Jessie followed the Blackwoods to a dining room where a table was set for three, the silverware gleaming in the lamplight. Sit, Samuel gestured to one of the chairs. Jessie perched awkwardly, hyper-aware of her posture, her movements, the pitch of her voice. Everything she'd practiced for months felt suddenly insufficient under the bright lamps of the Blackwood dining room. A middle-aged Mexican woman appeared from what must have been the kitchen, carrying a platter of roasted beef. She set it on the table with practiced ease, then gave Jessie a curious once-over. "I'm Maria. This is Jessie Miller, our new horse trainer," Samuel explained. "Miller, this is Maria Diaz, the finest cook in the territory and the reason this house runs smoothly." "Good to meet you," Jessie managed, nodding respectfully. Maria smiled warmly. "Eat well, young man. You're too skinny for ranch work." As she returned to the kitchen, Samuel began carving the roast. "Lucas tells me you've made more progress with Devil's Spite in 3 weeks than others did in 3 months." "The horse just needed understanding, sir," Jessie replied, accepting the plate Lucas passed to her. "He was afraid, not mean. Fear often looks like meanness to those who don't know better," Samuel observed, his eyes thoughtful. "Where did you learn your approach to horses?" The question was innocent enough, but Jessie felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with any inquiry about her past. "My father taught me. He had a small farm in Missouri." "And what brought you all the way out here?" Samuel asked, passing a bowl of potatoes. Jessie hesitated, aware of both Blackwoods watching her. "My father died. Nothing left for me there." Lucas's expression softened slightly, but Samuel's remained evaluative. "I'm sorry for your loss, but their loss is our gain. We've needed someone with your touch." The rest of the meal progressed with similar questions. Where had she worked before? What experience did she have with cattle as well as horses? Did she plan to stay through the winter? Jessie answered carefully, sticking to the story she'd constructed and elaborated over months of travel. "And no family left back east?" Samuel asked, as Maria cleared the dinner plates and brought coffee. "No, sir, just me now." Samuel nodded slowly. "Well, good hands are always welcome at Blackwood Ranch. Lucas tells me you've started working with that nervous mare as well." Grateful for the shift to safer territory, Jessie relaxed slightly. "Yes, sir. She's coming along. Should let me touch her tomorrow or the next day, without ropes or restraints." Samuel raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "Forcing her would just confirm her fears," Jessie explained, momentarily forgetting her caution in her enthusiasm for the subject. "She needs to learn that humans can be trusted again." "Remarkable approach," Samuel murmured, glancing at his son. "You were right about this one, Lucas." Something in that exchange, a wordless communication between father and son, made Jessie uneasy. She sipped her coffee, using the cup to hide her expression. As the evening wound down, Samuel excused himself to attend to some paperwork, leaving Jessie alone with Lucas. An awkward silence settled between them as they moved to the porch, the night air cool after the warmth of the house. "You did well," Lucas said finally. "My father was impressed." Jessie nodded, relief making her lightheaded. She'd survived the dinner without raising suspicions, a victory she hadn't been certain of. "He doesn't invite hands to dinner often," Lucas continued, leaning against the porch railing. "Only those he thinks might be worth investing in long term." The implication was clear. Samuel Blackwood saw potential in her, wanted her to stay. The thought was both flattering and terrifying. Staying meant more chances to slip up, more opportunities for someone to see through her disguise. "I should get back," Jessie said, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Early start tomorrow." Lucas studied her face in the lamplight spilling from the windows. "You're always in a hurry to get away, Miller. Anyone would think you're carrying secrets." The comment, delivered casually but with penetrating eyes, sent ice through Jessie's veins. She forced a shrug, trying to appear nonchalant. Just tired is all. Lucas straightened. I'll walk you back. No need, Jesse said quickly, already stepping toward the stairs. I know the way. I insist. Something in Lucas's tone brooked no argument. Nights are getting colder. Not good to walk alone. Trapped. Jesse could only nod stiffly and allow Lucas to fall into step beside her as they made their way from the main house toward the bunkhouse. The moon hung full and bright overhead, casting everything in silver light that seemed to strip away shadows and hiding places. They walked in silence for several minutes, the only sounds their boots on the packed earth and the distant lowing of cattle. Jessie kept her eyes fixed ahead, achingly aware of Lucas's presence beside her, his height, his strength, the occasional brush of his arm against hers that sent unwelcome shivers across her skin. You know, Lucas said suddenly, his voice low, there's a position opening up. Foreman of the East Section. Good pay. Private cabin instead of the bunkhouse. Jessie's steps faltered slightly. Why tell me? Because you should apply for it. Lucas stopped, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his features were cast in sharp relief, his eyes almost luminous. You've proven yourself with the horses. You have a good head on your shoulders. The men respect you even with your quiet ways. A private cabin. The thought was tempting. A place where she wouldn't have to maintain her guard constantly, where she could sleep without fear, bathe without skulking in pre-dawn darkness. But it also meant greater responsibility, more interaction with the Blackwoods, more chances for someone to notice what shouldn't be noticed. I don't know anything about being a foreman, she hedged. You'd learn, Lucas countered. I'd teach you. The offer hung between them, loaded with implications Jessie couldn't afford to examine too closely. Lucas, standing close enough that she could see the faint stubble along his jaw, could smell the lingering scent of soap and leather that clung to him. Why me? She asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. There are more experienced hands. Lucas's expression grew thoughtful. Because you see things differently. You understand that strength isn't always about force. We need that kind of thinking. They had reached the bunkhouse now, its dark shape looming against the star-filled sky. Relief at having survived both the dinner and this conversation washed through Jessie. Think about it, Lucas said, stepping back. No need to decide tonight. Jessie nodded, grateful for the reprieve. Or good night then. Good night, Miller. Lucas turned to go, then paused. You did well tonight. No need to have been so nervous. As he walked away, his tall figure gradually swallowed by the darkness, Jessie released a shaky breath. If only he knew the true source of her nervousness, not the dinner, not the conversation with his father, but the growing danger of Lucas Blackwood himself. The danger of someone who saw too much, who asked too many questions, and whose presence made it increasingly difficult to remember that Jessie Miller was a fiction that kept Elizabeth Jessica Harmon alive. The next week passed in a blur of work and watchfulness. Jessie spent her days with the horses, making steady progress with both Ember and the skittish mare she'd named Willow in her mind. She kept her interactions with the other hands brief and professional, and tried to avoid being alone with Lucas whenever possible, a task made difficult by his regular presence at the training corrals. But despite her caution, something was shifting at Blackwood Ranch. The hands no longer viewed her as the peculiar newcomer. They sought her advice with difficult horses, invited her to join card games in the evenings, treated her as one of their own. It should have been gratifying. Instead, it terrified her. Belonging meant being seen, being remembered. Worse still was the growing awareness that Lucas Blackwood occupied far too many of her thoughts. She found herself noticing details she had no business noticing, the way sunlight caught in his hair, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the gentleness of his hands when he worked with the horses. These observations were dangerous luxuries she couldn't afford. You never gave me an answer about the foreman position, Lucas said one afternoon as they worked side by side, brushing down Ember after a successful training session. Jessie kept her eyes on the horse, still thinking on it. What's there to think about? Lucas pressed. Better pay, private quarters, more responsibility. Most hands would jump at the chance. I'm not most hands, Jessie replied, immediately regretting the words. Different, again, always drawing attention to how she didn't quite fit. Lucas was silent for a moment, his brush moving in steady strokes along Ember's flank. No, he finally said, but you certainly aren't. Something in his tone made Jessie glance up, only to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Thoughtful, curious, almost tender. She looked away quickly, her heart hammering against her binding. "I'll let you know by the end of the week," she managed, setting down her brush and stepping back from the horse. "I need to check on Willow now." Lucas nodded, letting her retreat without further comment. But she could feel his eyes following her as she crossed to the mare's corral, the weight of his gaze like a physical touch between her shoulder blade. That evening, as Jessie sat on her cot mending a tear in her shirt, Emmett approached and settled on the neighboring bunk. "Heard Blackwood offered you the East Section foreman job," the older man said, without preamble. Jessie nodded, continuing her stitching. "You taking it?" She shrugged. "Haven't decided." Emmett was quiet for a moment, watching her work. "You should. You've got a good head. Men listen to you, even with how quiet you are. Maybe because of it." Jessie looked up, surprised by the endorsement. "You've been here longer." "Should be yours." Emmett chuckled, the sound rough from years of trail dust and tobacco. "I'm too old to change my ways. Besides, I like working cattle. Horses were never my strong suit." He paused, his weathered face growing serious. "But there's something you should know if you take it." Jessie set down her mending, giving him her full attention. "East Section's been having trouble. Cattle disappearing. Fences cut. Someone's been rustling, but they're smart about it, taking just a few head at a time, making it look like strays wandered off." "Why, tell me this." Emmett's eyes were steady. "Because if you take that job, you'll be responsible for stopping it, and whoever's doing it won't take kindly to interference." The warning settled like a stone in Jessie's stomach. Taking the foreman position meant not just greater visibility within the ranch, but potentially making enemies outside it. Enemies who might dig into her past, discover who she really was. "Thanks for the warning," she said quietly. Emmett nodded and stood. "Think on it, but don't let fear make your decision. You're young, but you've got grit. Seen it in how you handle those horses." After he walked away, Jessie sat motionless, the half-mended shirt forgotten in her lap. The smart choice was clear. Decline the position, keep her head down, move on in a few months as she'd done at other ranches. Anonymity was safety, but a small, treacherous part of her yearned for what the position offered. Not just the private cabin or better pay, but purpose. A chance to build something rather than merely survive. A reason to stay. And beneath that thought lurked another, more dangerous one. Staying meant remaining near Lucas Blackwood, whose presence had become both a threat and a comfort she couldn't explain even to herself. 3 days later, a late spring storm rolled across the prairie, bringing lashing rain and howling winds that forced most outdoor work to halt. The hands huddled in the bunkhouse, playing cards and swapping increasingly outlandish stories as thunder shook the walls. Jessie sat apart, using the rare downtime to mend tack by the light of a lantern. The familiar work kept her hands busy, while her mind circled endlessly around the decision she needed to make about the foreman position. A sudden commotion at the door drew her attention. One of the younger hands burst in, dripping wet and wide-eyed. "Oh dude, the black mare's gone wild," he gasped. "Broke through her corral in the storm." Lucas is trying to calm her, but she's panicked something fierce. Jessie was on her feet before she could think, grabbing her coat. "Where?" "North pasture." She was heading for the creek when I left to get help. Without waiting to hear more, Jessie plunged into the storm, rain immediately soaking through her clothes. The wind tore at her hat, threatening to rip it from her head and expose her too long hair. She clutched it firmly as she ran toward the north pasture, heart pounding with worry for both Willow and Lucas. The scene she found there sent ice through her veins. The mare was indeed panicked, rearing and wheeling near the swollen creek, her eyes white with terror. Lucas stood several yards away, moving slowly toward her, speaking words lost to the howling wind. But the ground was treacherous with mud, the creek rising rapidly with the downpour, and the mare was dangerously close to the eroding bank. "Lucas!" Jessie shouted, slogging through the mud toward him. "She's too scared. The bank won't hold." He half turned at her voice, his face grim with determination and streaked with rain. "Can't leave her! She'll drown if she falls in." Jesse assessed the situation rapidly. The creek had become a churning torrent, its banks crumbling under the onslaught. The mare's panicked movements were taking her closer to the edge with each passing second. Lucas was right. They couldn't abandon her, but his approach wasn't working. The horse was too far gone in her terror. Without conscious thought, Jessie began to sing. It was a lullaby her father had taught her, one she'd used to calm nervous foals on their small farm. Her voice rose above the storm, the gentle melody incongruous against the fury of wind and rain. Both Lucas and the mare froze at the sound. Jessie continued singing as she moved forward, no longer thinking about disguises or deepened voices or careful movements. In this moment, there was only the frightened animal and the song that might save her. The mare's ears flicked toward Jessie, her wild eyes focusing on the approaching figure. Step by slow step, Jessie closed the distance between them, the lullaby never faltering despite the rain streaming down her face. When she finally reached the mare, Jessie extended her hand, palm up. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then Willow lowered her head and pressed her velvet nose into Jessie's palm. "That's it," Jessie murmured, letting her natural voice emerge soft and soothing. "You're safe now. Let's get you home." She reached for the trailing lead rope and gently turned the mare away from the creek, guiding her back towards safer ground. Only when they were well away from the bank did Jessie look up to find Lucas staring at her, his expression unreadable through the curtain of rain. Realization crashed over her with the force of the storm. In her urgency to save the mare, she'd forgotten everything. Her disguise, her caution, the deepened voice she'd maintained for months. She'd sung in her natural voice, spoken without thinking, moved with the instinctive grace she normally suppressed. Lucas had heard, Lucas had seen. Time seemed to suspend as they stood facing each other in the driving rain, the mare now calm between them. Jessie couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. 5 months of careful deception undone in a moment of crisis. "We need to get her back to the stable," Lucas finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "Before this storm gets worse." Jessie nodded, unable to form words. Together they led the mare back toward the ranch buildings, the journey passing in a silence heavier than the storm clouds above. Jessie's mind raced, searching desperately for explanations, excuses, anything to account for what Lucas had witnessed. But as they reached the shelter of the stable and guided Willow into a dry stall, she knew the truth was written in every line of Lucas's body, the careful distance he maintained, the way he avoided meeting her eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He knew. After ensuring the mare was secure, Lucas finally turned to Jessie, his expression guarded. "Get dried off," he said, his voice revealing nothing. "We'll talk later." It wasn't a request, it was a reckoning. As Jessie trudged back to the bunkhouse, soaked to the skin and chilled to the bone, she knew her time at Blackwood Ranch, perhaps her time as Jessie Miller altogether, was coming to an end. Jessie changed into dry clothes with mechanical movements, her mind racing through limited options. She could run now, disappear into the storm before Lucas could confront her. The weather would cover her tracks, give her a head start, but she had nowhere to go, little money saved. And the storm was dangerous. She might not survive a night exposed to its fury. The alternative was to face Lucas, to try explaining without revealing too much. But what explanation could possibly suffice? A boy didn't sing lullabies in a voice sweet and high. A boy didn't move with the unconscious grace she'd displayed in that moment of crisis. The bunkhouse was mercifully empty, the other hands still occupied elsewhere. Jessie sat on her cot, head in her hands, waiting for whatever came next. The storm continued to rage outside, rain lashing against the windows like tiny, desperate fists. She didn't have to wait long. The door opened, admitting a gust of wind and rain, and Lucas's tall figure. He too had changed into dry clothes, his hair still damp and tousled. His expression was unreadable as he crossed to where she sat. "Walk with me," he said quietly. Jessie looked up at him, confusion mingling with dread. "In this storm. To the tack room. It's private there." Privacy, of course. Whatever confrontation was coming, he wouldn't subject her to it in front of the other hands. Small mercy that Wordlessly, she stood and followed him back into the deluge, hunching her shoulders against the driving rain. They made their way to the stable in silence, the noise of the storm swallowing any possibility of conversation. Inside, the warm, familiar smells of hay and horses greeted them. The animals shifted restlessly in their stalls, disturbed by the thunder that still rattled the timbers overhead. Lucas led the way past them to the tack room at the far end, a small, windowless space lined with saddles, bridles, and tools of the trade. He lit the lamp hanging from the central beam, then turned to face her. In the golden light, his expression was grave but not angry. Somehow that was worse. Anger she could have understood, could have defended against. This careful control, this measured assessment, it left her nowhere to hide. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a wooden bench along one wall. Jessie remained standing, her back to the door, instinctively keeping her escape route clear. "I should check on Willow. She's fine. I looked in on her before coming to find you." Lucas crossed his arms, studying her with those two perceptive eyes. "You're not a boy." The words hung in the air between them, simple and damning. Not a question, not an accusation, a statement of fact. Jessie's throat went dry. She could deny it, of course, could claim he was mistaken, that the storm had played tricks with her voice, that exhaustion had affected her movements, but the certainty in his eyes told her such denials would be futile. "And oh," she finally admitted, the word barely audible above the muffled sounds of the storm. "I'm not." Lucas nodded slowly, as if he'd merely confirmed something long suspected, rather than uncovered a deception that could get her fired, or worse. "How long have you been pretending?" 5 months, she answered, seeing no point in further lies. "Since I left Missouri." "Your name isn't Jessie Miller." Another statement, not a question. She swallowed hard. "No. Are you going to tell me what it is?" She hesitated, weighing the risk. Her real name might mean nothing to him, or it might be one he'd seen on wanted posters. "Elizabeth," she finally said, offering only part of the truth. "Elizabeth Harmon." "Elizabeth," he repeated, the name sounding strange and yet right on his lips. Why the deception? Why pretend to be a boy to work on a ranch? Here was the dangerous ground. How much could she reveal without putting herself at greater risk? "Women don't get hired as ranch hands," she said, choosing the simplest part of the truth. "And a woman traveling alone draws attention, the wrong kind." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "So you became Jessie Miller?" "Yes." Lucas was quiet for a long moment. The only sounds, the patter of rain on the roof and the occasional shifting of horses in their stalls. Finally, he uncrossed his arms and took a step toward her. "You're very good with the horses," he said, the apparent non sequitur catching her off guard. "Better than any hand I've worked with." That part wasn't a lie. She shook her head, uncertain where this was leading. "No, that was real. And your father really taught you?" "Yes. He raised me alone after my mother died. Taught me everything he knew about horses, farming." A sad smile touched her lips briefly. "Said there was no sense in me not learning just because I was a girl." Lucas nodded, taking another step closer. "You've been careful, very careful, but there were signs." "Signs?" Despite everything, curiosity pricked at her. "Small things. The way you always woke before the others. How you never bathed with the men. Your hands, strong but smaller, with more delicate fingers than most ranch hands." His eyes met hers directly. "And the way you watch people, always alert, always assessing, like prey watching for predators." The observation was so accurate it stole her breath. She had felt like prey for so long now, hunted, vigilant, always ready to flee. "Yet what are you going to do?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her since he'd seen through her disguise. Lucas studied her face for a long moment before answering. "That depends on why you're running. Is someone looking for you, Elizabeth?" The direct question struck her like a physical blow. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "Yes, the law." She nodded once, the motion barely perceptible. "And for what crime?" Here it was, the moment of truth that could destroy whatever fragile understanding might be forming between them. "Murder," she whispered, the word falling like a stone into the quiet of the tack room. To his credit, Lucas didn't recoil, didn't step away. His expression remained steady, though his eyes sharpened with new attention. "Tell me what happened." It wasn't what she'd expected. Not condemnation, not immediate judgment, but a simple request to explain. The unexpectedness of it loosened something tight in her chest, allowing words to flow that she'd kept dammed up for months. "My father died last year," she began, her voice low. "Left me the farm, small as it was. I managed well enough on my own for a while." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. "Then a man from town, James Mercer, started coming around. Said a woman shouldn't be alone, that I needed protection, a husband. I refused him." Lucas listened silently, his face betraying nothing. He didn't take the refusal well, kept coming back, more insistent each time. Her hands clenched unconsciously at the memory. One night, he showed up drunk, forced his way inside, said if I wouldn't agree willingly, he'd take what he wanted first. And I'd be so ruined, no one else would have me. Understanding darkened Lucas's eyes, but still he said nothing, allowing her to tell the story at her own pace. We struggled. He was stronger, but I was fighting for my life, my dignity. Her voice grew distant, remembering. "My father's rifle was mounted above the fireplace. I managed to reach it. Mercer thought I wouldn't dare use it." A bitter smile twisted her lips. "He was wrong. Self-defense," Lucas said quietly. "The law didn't see it that way. Mercer's family has influence in that county. His father's the banker, his uncle's the judge. They said I lured him in, then killed him when he threatened to expose my loose ways." The injustice of it still burned, even after months on the run. The sheriff gave me a choice: stand trial before a jury that would never believe me over the Mercers, or disappear. I chose to run. The full story hung between them now, raw and unvarnished. Jesse, Elizabeth, waited for his response, for the inevitable withdrawal, the moral judgment, perhaps even the decision to turn her in for the reward that surely existed. Instead, Lucas moved to the bench she had refused earlier and sat down heavily, as if the weight of her story had physically affected him. "So you became a boy, traveled west, found work where you could, yes, and ended up here." She nodded, still wary, still poised for flight if his next words indicated danger. Lucas looked up at her, his expression complicated: sympathy, admiration, and something else she couldn't quite identify. "You're safer as Jesse," he said finally. "The men respect you. You do good work. No one needs to know different." The meaning of his words took a moment to penetrate her fear. When they did, she stared at him in disbelief. "You're not going to tell anyone?" "No." "Or make me leave?" He shook his head. "Why would I? You're the best horse trainer this ranch has seen in years." Relief made her dizzy, forcing her to finally take a seat on a nearby stool. "I don't understand." "What's to understand?" Lucas's voice was gentle but matter-of-fact. "You did what you had to survive, and you've proven your worth here a dozen times over. But I lied. I'm still lying. To protect yourself." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Elizabeth, sometimes the truth is a luxury not everyone can afford." The storm raged through the night and into the following day, keeping the ranch hands close to shelter and providing Elizabeth a much-needed reprieve from immediate decision. Lucas had left her in the tack room with a final assurance. Her secret was safe with him. She'd returned to the bunkhouse in a daze, her mind struggling to process this unexpected turn of events. She'd prepared for every reaction except acceptance, anger, disgust, moral outrage. These she'd steeled herself against, but understanding, compassion, these left her unbalanced, unsure how to proceed. By the second day, when the storm finally broke and watery sunlight spilled across the mud-soaked ranch, Elizabeth had reached no firm conclusions about her future. She rose before dawn as always, bound her chest with practiced movements, and became Jessie Miller once more. The familiar routine brought comfort in its simplicity, whatever uncertainties lay ahead. For now she knew her role. The ranch was a mess of debris and standing water. Fences needed mending, strayed cattle required gathering, and the horses were restless after 2 days confined to their stalls. Jessie joined the other hands in tackling the most urgent repairs, grateful for physical work that required little thought. She managed to avoid direct interaction with Lucas throughout the morning, though she felt his eyes on her several times as he directed the recovery efforts from the storm. It was mid-afternoon when he finally approached her as she worked to repair a section of corral fencing. "DeMiller, he called, using her alias deliberately, she noticed. Need you to check the east pasture fence line. Take Ember. He could use the exercise after being cooped up, Jessie nodded, setting down her tools. Yes, sir. The formality earned her a raised eyebrow, but Lucas said nothing more as she headed toward the stable. Inside, she found Ember already saddled, along with Lucas's own mount. Oh, thought I'd ride with you, Lucas said from behind her. Need to see the full extent of the damage. It wasn't a request, and Jessie knew better than to object. Soon they were riding east, the sodden prairie stretching before them. Neither spoke for the first mile, the silence broken only by the squelch of hooves in mud and the occasional call of returning birds. You've been avoiding me, Lucas finally said, his voice neutral. Jessie kept her eyes on the horizon, seemed wise. Because I know, yes. Lucas guided his horse around a particularly deep puddle before responding. I meant what I said. Your secret is safe with me. Why? The question had been burning in her since their conversation in the tack room. Why protect me? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally did, his voice was thoughtful. Do you know how I came to be at Blackwood Ranch? The apparent non sequitur caught her off guard. Your father built it. You're his son. That's true. But I wasn't raised here. Lucas's gaze remained fixed ahead as he spoke. My mother was Cheyenne. My father met her during his early days in the territory, when he was just another man looking to carve out a place for himself. They couldn't marry legally, but they lived as husband and wife for years. Jessie listened, surprised by this personal revelation. I was born on Cheyenne land, raised in my mother's traditions until I was 12. A shadow passed over his face. Then came the Baker Creek Massacre. You might have heard of it, she nodded grimly. Everyone in the territories knew of the Baker Creek Massacre, a peaceful Cheyenne village slaughtered by cavalry soldiers who claimed they were hunting raiders. Women, children, elders, none had been spared. My mother sent me away when the soldiers came, made me promise to find my father. His voice grew distant with memory. I watched from the hills as they killed everyone I knew. Then I ran for 3 days straight to find a man I'd never met, whose only description was tall, with eyes like winter sky, called Blackwood. I'm sorry, Jessie said softly, the words inadequate for such loss. Lucas acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. My point is, I know something about living between worlds, about hiding parts of yourself to survive. When my father took me in, he taught me to speak, dress, and act like a white man. Said it was the only way I'd ever be safe. Understanding dawned. So you built a disguise too, of a different kind. But yes, Lucas turned to look at her directly. We all wear masks, Elizabeth, some more literal than others. The use of her real name startled her, even though no one was near enough to hear. Don't call me that, she said automatically. And I'm Jessie now, even when it's just us. The question carried weight beyond the simple words. Jessie hesitated, uncertain how to navigate this new territory between them. Not quite friendship, something more complex than mere alliance. I've been Jessie so long now, she finally said. Sometimes I forget Elizabeth ever existed. Lucas nodded, accepting this. Then Jessie it is. They rode in silence for another mile, checking fence posts and marking places that needed repair. The easy rhythm of the work provided a welcome distraction from the charged conversation. Have you decided about the foreman position? Lucas asked eventually. Jessie had almost forgotten the offer amid the drama of the storm and her exposed identity. You still want me to take it? Even knowing what you know. Why wouldn't I? Your gender doesn't change your abilities. He guided his horse around a fallen tree limb. In fact, I'd say surviving as you have demonstrates exactly the kind of resourcefulness and determination we need. The unexpected praise warmed something in her chest. The other hands might not feel the same if they knew. They won't know unless you choose to tell them. Lucas's expression grew serious. But you should know what you'd be getting into. Emmett told you about the rustling, Jessie nodded. Said it's been happening on the east section. It's worse than he knows. We've lost nearly 30 head over the past few months. Small enough numbers each time to look like straying or predators, but it adds up. Lucas's jaw tightened, And last month, one of our hands was found beaten half to death near the east fence line. Claims he doesn't remember who did it, but I think he saw something he shouldn't have. The implication was clear. Whoever was responsible for the rustling was dangerous, willing to hurt or kill to protect their operation. Taking the foreman position meant putting herself directly in their path. "You still want me to take the job?" Jesse asked quietly. "I want you to understand the risks," Lucas countered. This isn't just about managing men and horses. Someone's targeting Blackwood Ranch, and they won't welcome interference." Jesse considered this as they crested a small rise overlooking the eastern property. From this vantage point, the vastness of the ranch spread before them, rolling prairie dotted with cattle, distant line shacks marking the boundaries, the creek winding like a silver ribbon through it all. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that resonated deeply within her. "Why me?" she asked again, echoing her question from days before. "There must be hands with more experience, men who've been here longer." Lucas's expression grew thoughtful. "Because you see things others miss. Because you understand that strength comes in different form, and because you have more reason than most to be vigilant." He paused. Also, no one would expect a rustler to fear a slender young man like yourself. They might underestimate you. That could be an advantage." The logic was sound, if cold-blooded. Jesse studied the land before them, weighing risks against rewards, fear against opportunity. For 5 months, she'd existed in a state of perpetual flight, never allowing herself to think beyond immediate survival. The prospect of building something, of having purpose beyond mere hiding, pulled at her with unexpected strength. "If I take it," she said slowly, "I'd need complete authority over my section. No questions about my method." Lucas nodded. "You'd answer to me and my father, no one else. And private quarters. That's non-negotiable. The East Section foreman's cabin is small but solid. It's yours if you take the position." Jessie drew a deep breath, feeling as though she stood on the edge of a precipice. One path led backward, to continued wandering, to the familiar safety of impermanence. The other led forward into unknown territory, risky, but with the possibility of something she'd thought forever lost, a place to belong. "I'll do it," she said finally, the words emerging with more confidence than she felt. Lucas's eyes warmed with something that might have been approval, or perhaps something deeper. "Good. We'll make the announcement tomorrow." As they turned their horses back toward the ranch, the setting sun cast long shadows across the prairie, stretching ahead of them like fingers pointing toward a future neither could fully envision. For the first time in months, Jessie felt the faintest stirring of hope, dangerous perhaps, but impossible to deny. And if that hope was entwined with an awareness of the man riding beside her, his strength, his understanding, his own carefully constructed identity, well, that was a complication she would examine another day. The East Section foreman's cabin stood a quarter-mile from the main bunkhouse, a simple one-room structure built of rough-hewn logs with a small porch facing the sunrise. To Elizabeth, accustomed to shared quarters and constant vigilance, it looked like a palace. "It's not much," Lucas said as he helped her carry her meager belongings inside, "but it's solid, keeps the heat in winter, stays cool enough in summer." Elizabeth surveyed the sparse interior. A narrow bed against one wall, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a small cast-iron stove, and a single shelf for provisions. A washstand stood in one corner, with an actual mirror hanging above it, a luxury she hadn't enjoyed in months. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. Lucas set her saddlebags on the table, then hesitated, seeming reluctant to leave. The men took the news well. "They respect your work ethic." The announcement that morning had gone more smoothly than Elizabeth had anticipated. A few surprised looks, some good-natured ribbing about her youth, but overall acceptance. Emmett had nodded approvingly, and even the hands who'd been at the ranch longest offered no objection. "I still have to prove myself," she reminded him. "Words are easy. Results matter. You'll manage." His confidence warmed her, even as she tried to maintain a practical outlook. "I'll head out at first light tomorrow," she said. "I get a better sense of the boundaries. Check the line shacks. Make sure the men know I'm watching." Lucas nodded, approval in his eyes. "Good strategy. Let them see you're serious from the start." He moved toward the door, then paused, his hand on the latch. "Lock this behind me, and keep your rifle close." The reminder of danger sobered her. "I always do." After he left, Elizabeth secured the door, then stood in the center of the cabin, overwhelmed by the sudden solitude. For the first time in 5 months, she was truly alone, free from the need to maintain her disguise, even in sleep. She moved to the mirror, studying her reflection. Jessie Miller looked back at her, hair cut short and messy, face tanned and weathered from outdoor work, eyes guarded with habitual caution. Slowly, she unbuttoned her shirt, unwound the bindings from her chest, and straightened her posture. Elizabeth Harmon emerged gradually, like a figure stepping from shadows into light. Without the bindings, her breathing deepened naturally. Without the need to hunch and disguise her form, her shoulders relaxed, her movements softened. The transformation was subtle but profound, not just physical, but a shift in essence. For this one night, in the privacy of her own cabin, she allowed herself to simply be. Tomorrow, Jessie Miller would return, would ride out as the new foreman of Blackwood Ranch's east section. But tonight belonged to Elizabeth. She slept deeply for the first time in months, secure in the knowledge that no one would enter unannounced, that she need not maintain her disguise even in slumber. When dawn broke, she rose refreshed, ready to face whatever challenges her new position might bring. The first week as foreman tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The men assigned to her section, while respectful enough, watched her carefully, measuring her decisions, assessing her authority. She kept her orders clear and direct, her expectations high but reasonable. When she worked alongside them, she matched their effort, never asking more than she was willing to give herself. By the second week, a tentative rhythm had established itself. The hands began to relax around her, to trust her judgment, to bring problems to her rather than trying to solve everything themselves. She rode the boundaries daily, learning every creek and gully, every stand of trees, every place where the fence line might be vulnerable. And she watched for signs of the rustlers, finding them more frequently than she'd expected. Tracks leading away from the property, broken fence rails mended clumsily, cattle missing from counts that should have tallied. Whoever was stealing from Blackwood Ranch was growing bolder, less concerned with concealment. "They're testing you," Lucas said, when she reported her findings during their weekly meeting at the main house. "Seeing how observant you are, how seriously you take the losses." "What should I do?" Elizabeth asked, her voice low to avoid being overheard by Samuel Blackwood, who sat reviewing ledgers at the far end of the room. "For now, keep watching. Document everything. We need to understand their pattern before we can catch them." Lucas's expression darkened. "And be careful. They've already hurt one man who got too close." The warning was unnecessary. Elizabeth had survived this long by being cautious, by anticipating danger before it found her. But as she rode back to her cabin that evening, she felt eyes on her from the gathering darkness, watching, assessing. She wasn't the only one observing. She was being observed as well. 2 more weeks passed without incident, lulling her into a sense of security that shattered abruptly one moonless night. Elizabeth woke to the sound of Ember's warning whinny from the small corral beside her cabin. The horse rarely vocalized without cause. Moving silently, she reached for her rifle, then crept to the window. Nothing visible in the darkness, but Ember remained restless, pacing the perimeter of his enclosure. Someone was out there. Elizabeth dressed quickly, pulling on Jessie's clothes and persona-like armor. She checked her rifle, then slipped out the back door, keeping to the shadows as she circled the cabin. The night was cool and still, the only sounds the distant lowing of cattle and the soft snorts of her nervous horse. Movement caught her eye, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness near her woodpile. Elizabeth froze, rifle ready but not yet raised. The figure moved cautiously toward the cabin's front door, seeming to listen for sounds from within. She could have called out, could have fired a warning shot. Instead, she circled silently behind the intruder, closing the distance until her rifle barrel pressed against their spine. "Don't move," she growled, her voice low and menacing in Jessie's practiced tone. The figure stiffened, then slowly raised their hand. "Easy now," a man's voice said, the accent thick with Texas drawl. "No need for that, iron boy. Turn around. Slow." Elizabeth kept the rifle steady, her finger near but not on the trigger. The man obeyed, revealing a weather-beaten face she didn't recognize, not one of the Blackwood hands. He was older, perhaps 50, with a scar cutting through one eyebrow and a mouth set in a permanent sneer. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Why, what are you doing on Blackwood land?" "Just passing through," the man replied, his casual tone belied by the calculating look in his eyes. Thought this might be a line shack where a weary traveler could rest. The lie was transparent. Her cabin was clearly a permanent dwelling, not a line shack, and the man had been approaching with far too much caution for innocent purposes. "Try again," Elizabeth said coldly, this time without the lies. Something shifted in the man's expression, a hardening, a recognition that his act wasn't working. "You're the new foreman," he stated, rather than asked. Heard Blackwood hired some boy barely old enough to shave. The deliberate attempt to provoke her washed over Elizabeth without effect. She'd endured far worse in maintaining her disguise. "You didn't answer my question." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "My name's Garrett. I ride for the Triple T." He nodded toward the east. Neighboring spread. Elizabeth kept her expression neutral, though the information registered significantly. The Triple T ranch bordered Blackwood's eastern section, precisely where the cattle had been disappearing. "That doesn't explain why you're skulking around my cabin in the middle of the night." Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just being neighborly. Wanted to introduce myself to Blackwood's new man." He paused, studying her with uncomfortable intensity. "Though you're not much of a man yet, are you, boy?" The insinuation sent a chill through Elizabeth, not because of the intended insult to Jesse's masculinity, but because it hinted at suspicion about her true identity. Had he seen something that raised questions, or was he simply trying to rattle a young foreman? "I'm man enough to catch you trespassing," she replied evenly, "and man enough to put a bullet in you if you don't start walking back to Triple T land right now." Garrett's smile widened, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Spirited. I like that." He lowered his hands slowly. "No need for shooting. I'm going." He took a step backward, then another. "But we'll be seeing each other again, young foreman. Oh, count on it." Elizabeth kept her rifle trained on him until he disappeared into the darkness, then quickly returned to her cabin, securing the door behind her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, adrenaline making her hands tremble slightly as she placed the rifle within easy reach of her bed. The encounter had been brief but revealing. The Triple T's interest in her appointment couldn't be coincidence, not with their ranch bordering exactly where the rustling occurred, and Garrett's presence at her cabin, his thinly veiled threat. They were watching her, assessing the threat she posed to their operation. She needed to tell Lucas, but that would have to wait until morning. For now, she settled back on her bed, rifle close at hand, listening to the night sounds with new wariness. Sleep would not return tonight. Garrett's words echoed in her mind. "We'll be seeing each other again." It wasn't just a promise, it was a threat. And Elizabeth Harmon, hidden beneath Jesse Miller's carefully constructed identity, knew all too well how dangerous threats could become. Lucas's face darkened as Elizabeth recounted her nighttime encounter with Garrett. They stood in the shadow of the stable, voices kept low to prevent being overheard by the hands working nearby. "Triple T," he muttered, the name carrying weight beyond the simple syllables. "I should have known." "You know them?" Elizabeth asked, though the answer was evident in his expression. "Thomas Thornton owns Triple T. He's been trying to buy out smaller ranches in the territory for years, sometimes legally, sometimes through less savory methods." Lucas's jaw tightened. "My father refused to sell, even when Thornton offered twice what this land is worth. And now cattle are disappearing from the section that borders Triple T land," Elizabeth concluded. "Not a coincidence." "No," Lucas ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "But knowing and proving are different matters. Thornton's careful, never does his own dirty work, always maintains plausible deniability. This Garrett, he works for Thornton, his foreman, mean as a wounded bear and twice as dangerous." Lucas's eyes met hers, concern evident. "If he came to your cabin, he was sending a message. Thornton knows we've put someone new in charge of the east section, and he's letting us know he's watching." Elizabeth nodded, having reached the same conclusion during her sleepless night. "What do? We increase patrols along the eastern boundary. No one rides alone out there anymore." Lucas's expression was grim. "And you need to be especially careful. Garrett's not a man to underestimate. I can handle myself, Elizabeth replied, a touch of defensiveness in her tone. "I know that." Lucas's voice softened slightly. "But Thornton's men won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way. The hand who was beaten, that was Triple T's work, almost certainly, though we couldn't prove it. Jenkins recovered, but he asked for reassignment to the north section. Wouldn't say what he saw, just that he didn't want to work the eastern boundary anymore." Elizabeth processed this information, fitting it into the pattern she'd been assembling. "They're trying to scare us off that land, make it seem more trouble than it's worth. That's Thornton's way. He wants the water rights to the creek that runs through our eastern section. With those, he could control half the grazing land in the county." Lucas's expression hardened. "My father built this ranch from nothing. We won't surrender any part of it to a man like Thornton." The resolve in his voice stirred something in Elizabeth, a reflection of her own determination, perhaps the stubborn refusal to be driven from what was rightfully hers. She'd lost her father's farm to injustice. She understood what it meant to defend one's legacy. "We'll need proof," she said, mind already working through possibilities. "Something solid enough that the territorial marshal can't ignore it." Lucas nodded. "Catch them in the act, but carefully. I'll set up watching posts along the most vulnerable sections of the boundary. Rotate men so the Triple T hands can't predict our movements." Elizabeth's plan formed as she spoke, "And I'll spread word that we've been recording cattle counts carefully, make them think we might not notice a few missing head, lull them into complacency." Lucas concluded with approval. "Make them think we're not as vigilant as we actually are." "Exactly." A hint of a smile touched Elizabeth's lips. "They already underestimate me because of my size, my youth. Let them continue to do so. Just don't underestimate them in return," Lucas cautioned. "Especially Garrett. He's observant, clever. If anyone might see through your disguise, he won't." Elizabeth interrupted firmly. "I've fooled everyone for months. I know what I'm doing." Lucas studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but promise me something." "What?" "If things get too dangerous, you'll tell me immediately. No heroics. No solo confrontations." The concern in his voice was unmistakable, warming something in Elizabeth's chest, even as she maintained her practical exterior. "I promise." "Good." Lucas glanced toward the main house, where his father stood on the porch watching them. "I'll inform my father about Garrett's visit. He should know what we're facing." Elizabeth nodded, then turned to go, but Lucas's voice stopped her. "Jesse." She looked back, still adjusting to hearing her alias from someone who knew the truth behind it. "Be careful," he said simply. The words carried more weight than their simplicity suggested. Elizabeth acknowledged them with a nod before heading toward the east section, where her men waited for the day's assignment. Over the next 2 weeks, Elizabeth implemented her strategy with methodical precision. She established regular patrol routes along the boundary, then deliberately created patterns with obvious gaps that weren't actually unmonitored, but would appear so to watching eyes. She rotated men unpredictably, keeping her own movements equally irregular so that anyone observing would struggle to anticipate where she might appear. And she waited, patient as a hunter in a blind, for Triple T to make their move. The opportunity came on a night when the moon hung half full in a sky scattered with stars. Elizabeth had positioned herself on a rise overlooking one of the apparent gaps in their patrol schedule, a stretch of fence line that hadn't seen a Blackwood rider in 3 days. Beside her, concealed in the tall grass, lay Emmett, whose experience she'd come to value over the past weeks. "Someone's coming," he whispered, his hearing sharper than hers despite his age. Elizabeth strained her eyes against the darkness, finally making out 3 riders approaching the fence line from the east, from Triple T land. They moved with purpose but caution, stopping frequently to listen for pursuit. "I told you they'd come tonight," Emmett muttered with grim satisfaction. "New moon tomorrow. Last chance for good visibility this week." Elizabeth nodded, her focus entirely on the intruders. As they reached the fence, 2 dismounted while the 3rd held the horses. Working quickly, they cut through the wire, creating an opening large enough for cattle to pass through. "They're not just opportunists. Elizabeth breathed. This is organized. Emmett grunted agreement. Question is, do we stop them now or follow to see where they take the cattle? Elizabeth considered briefly. Follow. We need to catch them with stolen stock, not just cutting fence. They watched as the rustlers slipped through the fence onto Blackwood land, leading their horses behind them. The men moved with practiced efficiency toward a small herd of cattle grazing in the moonlight. Let's go, Elizabeth whispered, sliding backward through the grass to where their own horses waited. We need to circle around, get ahead of them. They'll have to take the cattle through that gap in the fence. Emmett nodded, following her lead. They mounted carefully, keeping to the shadows as they rode a wide arc that would position them near the damaged fence, without alerting the rustlers to their presence. They had just reached their vantage point when a gunshot shattered the night's silence. Elizabeth's head snapped toward the sound. In the distance, she could make out a struggle. The rustlers had encountered someone else, someone who wasn't part of her carefully orchestrated plan. Damn it, she hissed, spurring Ember forward. That's not our men. Emmett kept pace beside her as they raced toward the confrontation. As they drew closer, Elizabeth's blood ran cold at the sight that greeted them. Lucas Blackwood, outnumbered 3-1, fighting off the rustlers who had abandoned their attempt at stealing cattle in favor of subduing the unexpected witness. One rustler lay on the ground, clutching his leg where Lucas had apparently shot him. The other two had dismounted and were closing in, one with a pistol drawn, the other wielding a heavy coil of rope like a flail. Elizabeth didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle and fired a warning shot over their heads, causing all three men to freeze. Blackwood, hands, she shouted in Jessie's deepest voice. Drop your weapons. The rustlers hesitated, clearly calculating their odds against the newcomers. Lucas took advantage of their distraction to land a solid punch on the nearest man, sending him staggering backward. What followed was chaos. Shouts, the thunder of hooves as the spooked cattle scattered, the crack of another gunshot as one of the rustlers fired wildly in their direction. Elizabeth felt the bullet whiz past her ear as she charged forward, Ember responding to her urgency with powerful strides. She saw Lucas grappling with the larger rustler, the two men locked in a desperate struggle. The third man, recovering from Lucas's punch, drew a knife from his boot and moved toward the fight with deadly intent. Without conscious thought, Elizabeth leveled her rifle and fired. The rustler with the knife cried out, dropping his weapon as blood blossomed on his shoulder. He stumbled, then fell to his knees. Emmett had reached the man with the gunshot wound to the leg, his own weapon trained steadily on the injured rustler, preventing any further resistance. Elizabeth dismounted in a fluid motion, keeping her rifle aimed at the wounded knife wielder as she approached the ongoing struggle between Lucas and the remaining rustler. The fight ended abruptly as Lucas delivered a powerful blow to his opponent's jaw, sending the man crashing to the ground, unconscious. Lucas stood over him, breathing hard, a cut bleeding freely above his eye and his knuckles raw. His gaze found Elizabeth's across the trampled grass, relief visible even in the dim light. You're a sight for sore eyes, Miller, he managed, his voice rough from exertion. Before she could respond, movement caught her peripheral vision. The rustler with the shoulder wound had staggered to his feet and was lunging toward her with desperate ferocity. Elizabeth pivoted, raising her rifle as a barrier, but she was a fraction too slow. The impact drove her backward, her boot catching on uneven ground. As she fell, her hat flew off, and with it, the careful illusion she'd maintained for months. Her hair, longer now than Jessie would ever have allowed, tumbled free, a dark cascade against the pale grass. Time seemed to suspend as she hit the ground, the rustler's weight driving the breath from her lungs. Above her, the man's eyes widened in shock as he registered what he was seeing, not the slender young man he'd expected, but unmistakably a woman. What the? He began, confusion momentarily overriding his attack. That moment of hesitation was all Elizabeth needed. She drove her knee upward with all her strength, connecting solidly with the man's groin. As he doubled over in agony, she twisted from beneath him and scrambled to her feet, reclaiming her rifle in a smooth motion. But the damage was done. Her secret lay exposed under the prairie moonlight, visible to everyone present, including the Triple T rustlers who, even in their defeat, had discovered something far more valuable than cattle, knowledge that could destroy everything she'd built at Blackwood Ranch. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. Emmett stared at Elizabeth with undisguised shock, his weathered face registering disbelief as he processed what he was seeing. The injured rustlers, despite their pain, wore expressions of stunned recognition and calculating awareness of the value this discovery might hold. It was Lucas who broke the frozen tableau, stepping forward to place himself between Elizabeth and the others. "Emmett," he said sharply, "secure these men. We're taking them back to the ranch." The older hand hesitated, his eyes still fixed on Elizabeth's exposed features, the unmistakable feminine contours no longer hidden by careful posture and loose clothing. "Now, Emmett," Lucas repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. Something in his tone penetrated Emmett's shock. With visible effort, he tore his gaze away and began binding the rustlers with rope from his saddle, his movements mechanical but effective. Elizabeth stood rooted in place, her mind racing through limited options. Run now, disappear into the night, leave everything behind once more. Stay and face the consequences of her deception. Neither choice offered safety. Lucas approached her slowly, as one might a spooked horse. "Your hat," he said quietly, bending to retrieve it from where it had fallen. He held it out to her, his eyes conveying a message beyond the simple gesture. "Put it back on. We'll handle this." With trembling hands, Elizabeth took the hat, tucking her hair beneath it in a practiced motion that felt suddenly inadequate. The illusion was shattered. No simple prop could restore it. "What do we do?" she whispered, fear making her voice higher than Jessie's careful tones. "We take them back," Lucas replied, keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Deal with this privately." "They know," she said, nodding toward the rustlers now being secured by Emmett. "They'll tell everyone. Let me worry about that." The steel in his voice surprised her. "For now, just be Jessie." One last time, Elizabeth swallowed hard, then nodded. Drawing on months of practice, she straightened her shoulders, widened her stance, lowered her chin, reconstructing Jessie Miller's posture and bearing piece by piece. "Mount up," Lucas called to Emmett, who had finished binding the rustlers. "We're heading back to the main house. Miller, you lead the way." The ride back to the ranch passed in tense silence. Elizabeth rode ahead as instructed, her mind spinning with contingency plans. Behind her, Lucas and Emmett escorted the three captured rustlers, whose occasional groans of pain punctuated the night sounds. The main house was illuminated with lanterns when they arrived, Samuel Blackwood standing on the porch with a rifle in his hands. Several ranch hands had gathered as well, roused by the commotion. "Lucas," Samuel called as they approached. "What's happened?" "Caught Triple T rustlers red-handed," Lucas replied, dismounting. "They need medical attention. Then we're locking them in the storage cellar until the marshal can collect them." Samuel's weathered face hardened as he surveyed the captured men. "Get Doc Willis," he ordered one of the watching hands, "and fetch those chains from the tool shed. I want these men secured properly." The ranch sprang into organized activity, men moving with purpose to carry out Samuel's instructions. In the confusion, Lucas approached Elizabeth, who had remained mounted, uncertain where she fit in this unfolding scenario. "Go to my father's study," he murmured. "Wait there, I'll handle this, then join you." Elizabeth hesitated. "Emmett, I'll speak with him. Go now, before anyone else notices." Without further argument, Elizabeth slipped away, tethering Ember to a hitching post before making her way to the main house. She entered through the side door, avoiding the commotion at the front, and found her way to Samuel Blackwood's study, a room she'd seen only once before, during her dinner at the house. The study was dark, lit only by moonlight through the windows. Elizabeth didn't dare light a lamp, instead pacing the perimeter of the room in agitated silence. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her, and she felt powerless to prevent it. It seemed hours before the door finally opened, admitting Lucas and, to her surprise, Emmett. Both men's expressions were grave as they entered, Lucas closing and locking the door behind them. "The rustlers are secured," Lucas said without preamble. "Doc's tending to their wounds. They'll live to face the marshal's justice." Elizabeth nodded, her attention focused on Emmett, whose face remained unreadable as he studied her. "And the rest?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "That depends," Lucas replied, glancing at Emmett, "on what happens in this room tonight." Emmett cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the quiet study. "So it's true," he said, addressing Elizabeth directly. "You're a woman." It wasn't a question, but Elizabeth nodded anyway. "Yes. For how long?" When Elizabeth raised an eyebrow at the odd phrasing, he clarified, "How long have you been pretending to be a boy named Jesse Miller?" "5 months," she answered truthfully. "Since I left Missouri." Emmett absorbed this, then turned to Lucas. "You knew." "I discovered the truth during the storm," Lucas admitted. "When she saved Willow from the creek, and you kept her secret." Again, not a question, but an observation freighted with implication. Lucas met the older man's gaze steadily. "I did." Emmett was silent for a long moment, his weathered face giving nothing away. Then, unexpectedly, he chuckled, a dry sound like autumn leaves rustling. "Always knew there was something different about you, Miller. Never thought it was this." Elizabeth tensed, uncertain where this was leading. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," Emmett replied, sobering. "Those Triple T men saw what I saw. They know you're a woman. Once they talk to Thornton, that information becomes currency, valuable currency in their conflict with Blackwood Ranch. They'll use it to discredit us," Lucas added grimly. "A ranch that employs a woman disguised as a man. The scandal would damage our standing with the banks, with buyers, not to mention what it would do to you," Emmett said, his gaze returning to Elizabeth. "A woman living as a man, riding with men, sleeping in the bunkhouse. The territory's not kind to those who break such fundamental rules." Elizabeth felt cold dread settling in her stomach. He was right, of course. Discovery meant more than just losing her position at Blackwood Ranch. It meant scandal, ostracism, perhaps even legal consequences. "There's something else you should know," Lucas said quietly. "Miller, Elizabeth, isn't just hiding her gender. She's wanted for murder in Missouri." Emmett's eyebrows shot up. "Murder? Self-defense," Elizabeth corrected sharply, then sighed. But the law there didn't see it that way. Briefly, she recounted her story, James Mercer's assault, her desperate defense, the corrupt justice that had forced her to flee. When she finished, silence filled the study, heavy with the weight of decisions yet unmade. "So you've been running," Emmett finally said, "living as Jesse to survive." Elizabeth nodded, too drained for further explanation. "And now Triple T knows enough to destroy you and potentially damage Blackwood Ranch in the process." "Yes." Emmett stroked his grizzled chin thoughtfully. "Well, then, seems to me we have only one option." Elizabeth braced herself, expecting the worst. Termination at best, exposure at worst. "We need to make sure those men never get the chance to share what they saw tonight." Lucas frowned. "What are you suggesting, Emmett?" The older man's expression turned grim. "Nothing drastic, but those rustlers need to disappear before the marshal arrives. We caught them stealing cattle. That's hanging offense territory. If they were to escape tonight, their natural move would be to flee the territory entirely." "You want to let them go?" Elizabeth asked incredulously. "I want them gone," Emmett corrected, "and far from here, with a healthy fear of ever returning or speaking about what they saw." Lucas studied the older man with new respect. "You're protecting her. Why?" Emmett turned to Elizabeth, his weathered face softening slightly. "Because in 30 years of ranching, I've never seen anyone handle horses the way you do. Because you've proven yourself a dozen times over since you came here. And because I judge people by what they do, not what they are." Tears pricked at Elizabeth's eyes, unexpected emotion welling up at this gruff acceptance from a man she'd worked alongside for months. "There's more," Emmett continued. "I've suspected Triple T was behind the rustling for months. This confirms it. If we handle this right, we can solve both problems at once. Get rid of the witnesses to your secret and send a message to Thornton that his operation has been exposed." Lucas nodded slowly, the plan taking shape in his mind. "We let them escape, but make sure they know we have proof of Triple T's involvement. They'll run straight to Thornton with the news, and Thornton, facing potential charges for organized rustling, won't risk further conflict with Blackwood Ranch," Elizabeth concluded, seeing the strategy. Exactly, Emmett confirmed. Self-interest is a powerful motivator. Thornton values his reputation as a legitimate businessman, too much to risk it over a few head of cattle or the secret identity of a Blackwood hand. Hope flickered to life in Elizabeth's chest, a fragile, tentative thing, but present nonetheless. Will it work? It's our best chance, Lucas replied, but it leaves one question unanswered. He turned to her, his expression grave but gentle. What happens with Jessie Miller? The question hung in the air between them, laden with implications. Could she continue as Jessie, knowing her secret had been compromised once and might be again? Could she bear to give up the identity that had become, in many ways, more real to her than Elizabeth Harmon? Jessie has to go, she said finally, the words painful but necessary. It's too risky now. Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. And Elizabeth. Before she could answer, a knock came at the study door. All three tensed, exchanging alarmed glances. "Lucas," Samuel Blackwood's voice called from the hallway. "Are you in there? We need to discuss what to do with these rustlers." Lucas motioned for Elizabeth and Emmett to remain silent as he moved to the door, opening it just enough to speak to his father without revealing the room's other occupants. "I'll be right out," he said, just discussing strategy with Miller and Emmett. There was a pause. Then Samuel's voice again, quieter but still audible. "Is it true what one of those rustlers was babbling about? That Miller is actually a woman?" Elizabeth felt her heart stop, then restart with painful intensity. So the secret was already spreading. Lucas's shoulders tensed visibly, but his voice remained steady. "We need to talk, Father, privately. After we deal with the Triple T men." Another pause, longer this time. "Very well, but I expect a full explanation, Lucas. No more secrets on my rant." After his footsteps receded down the hallway, Lucas closed the door and turned back to Elizabeth and Emmett, his expression grim. "Change of plans," he said. "We need to move quickly. Father's involved now, and he won't be kept in the dark." "Will he understand?" Elizabeth asked, fear making her voice tremble slightly. "My father is many things," Lucas replied carefully. "Conventional isn't one of them, but this," he gestured at Elizabeth's disguise, "will test even his unconventional thinking." Emmett pushed away from the desk he'd been leaning against. "I'll handle the rustlers," he said decisively. "Get them gone before dawn. Make sure they understand the consequences of talking about anything they saw tonight." Lucas nodded gratefully. "And I'll speak with my father, alone first, to prepare him." "What about me?" Elizabeth asked, feeling strangely hollow as events moved forward without her direct involvement. Lucas's expression softened as he looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps seeing Elizabeth rather than Jessie for the first time in the lamplight. "You," he said gently, "need to decide who you want to be tomorrow. Jessie Miller has served his purpose. It's time for someone new to emerge." As Emmett slipped out to arrange the rustlers' strategic escape, Lucas stepped closer to Elizabeth, close enough that she could see the flecks of grey in his blue eyes. "Whatever you decide," he said quietly, "you have a place here. My father will understand once I explain." "The hands respect your work too much to lose you over something like this? And you?" Elizabeth asked, the question escaping before she could reconsider. Lucas's hand rose, hesitating briefly before gently touching her cheek, the first time he had ever touched her as the woman she truly was. "I see you more clearly now than ever before," he murmured, "and what I see is someone I don't want to lose." The warmth of his touch, the sincerity in his voice, sent a tremor through Elizabeth's carefully maintained composure. For months, she had suppressed everything feminine, everything vulnerable, everything that might betray her disguise. Now, with that disguise crumbling, those suppressed parts of herself rose to the surface with unexpected force. "I'm afraid," she admitted, the words barely audible. "I know," his thumb brushed her cheekbone gently, "but you're not alone anymore, Elizabeth. Whatever comes next, you face it with allies now." In the distance, a rooster crowed, the first herald of approaching dawn. A new day was coming, bringing with it choices that would shape the rest of Elizabeth's life. But for the first time since fleeing Missouri, those choices included possibilities beyond mere survival. As Lucas reluctantly stepped back, duty calling him to handle the unfolding crisis with the rustlers and his father, Elizabeth moved to the window. Outside, the eastern sky had begun to lighten, the stars fading as darkness retreated. On the horizon, where night still held sway, the moon hung low, the same moon that had witnessed her secret's exposure hours before. But secrets, once revealed, sometimes lost their power to harm. In the growing light of dawn, Elizabeth Harmon, no longer hidden behind Jesse Miller's careful disguise, faced the future with something she had thought forever lost, hope. And standing beside her, seen clearly for the first time in the morning light, the promise of a love that accepted her completely, not despite her past and her disguise, but because of the courage and determination that had driven her to survive against all odds. Under the fading prairie moonlight, a new story was beginning.